Episode 10, The Most Crucial Game, first aired on November 5th, 1972. It was written by John T. Dugan, born 1920 in New York, but we already know him because he was the writer for Dead Weight. This will be his last Columbo outing. And it was directed by Jeremy Kagan, born 1945 in New York as well. He's known for directing the films The Chosen and Conspiracy, The Trial of the Chicago 8, as well as a couple episodes of Chicago Hope, for which he won a Primetime Emmy Award. The episode begins with a helicopter shot of the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, which can be found in over 100 different productions. It was built in 1923 and has hosted the Summer Olympics in 1932 and 1984, and it is scheduled to host again in 2028, which, once that happens, it will become the first stadium to have hosted the Summer Olympics 3 times. It still looks pretty much exactly the same today. Now, hold your own ticket. This is stock footage from Super Bowl I with the Kansas City Chiefs versus Green Bay Packers on January 15, 1967. We see here a glimpse of the end zone with the Chiefs graphics painted on it. And here's a guy selling hats, I guess. Now that the stock footage has established the personality of our location, we have a real close look at the archway leading into the Coliseum and pan down to see more people, and those plaques back there are still there today. And here comes our star walking into frame as the title of the episode is displayed. I'm pretty sure I know who this guy is that runs up to Robert Culp. It looks like Mickey Golden, and we will see him again later in the episode, but we've actually already met him back in Suitable for Framing and Lady in Waiting. So this man is Paul Hanlon, played by Robert Culp. We first met Robert Culp during episode 2, Death Lends a Hand. So if you'd like to hear about his resume, you'll find it in that review. And that is how I have been doing all of my reviews and will continue, that if we've already met the actor, I don't repeat their resume. But this time he's got a nice 70s handlebar mustache to match his nice 70s style brown suit. Entering a very 70s rust-carpeted room, we meet a young man who says, "Good afternoon, Mr. Hanlon."
It's Jimmy, isn't it? You should have called the office.
Jimmy is played by Joe Renteria. I was not able to find where or when he was born, but somehow his filmography is readily available. It's so strange when that happens. He wrote and starred in the film Toke. He was in Marked for Death, Collateral Damage, and a few episodes of Queen of the South. Hanlon tells Jimmy that he does not need him here.
Well, I thought maybe Mr. Wagner might be bringing by some people.
Well, you're new in the organization, kid.
Hanlon says Eric Wagner owns the team, but football is not his game. Jimmy kindly offers Hanlon a drink, and Hanlon responds by giving him some money and tells him to get a seat at the game or take his girl to the movies because he does not need him here.
Okay, you scoot now.
Yes, sir.
Now that Jimmy is gone, Hanlon looks at the clock and picks up the phone. Listen in on the announcers talking here.
Story about that courageous young man. His right leg's been broken 4 times.
Wow, his right leg's been broken 4 times. It's really easy to treat the announcers' voices as just white noise, but some of the things they say are actually pretty funny. Now the scene cuts to a ringing phone that Paul Hanlon is calling. What we see on this oriental end table is a bottle of cognac and a pack of Metropolitan cigarettes. There is something mysterious about these cigarettes, though. When I research this particular brand, I find nothing but Twin Peaks references from a superfan who also wants to know what Metropolitan cigarettes were. Reading their blog, they concluded the brand was made up for Twin Peaks, but here we are in 1972, 18 years before Twin Peaks first aired, with a pack of Metropolitan cigarettes right in front of us. So now my assignment to myself and anyone else who would enjoy this is to keep your eye out for any other TV show or movie with a red pack of Metropolitan cigarettes. Please let me know if you ever find them. The camera pans down and we see some more empty liquor bottles, a pair of high-heeled shoes with one of the heels terribly broken, a giant golden Buddha statue with a lady's lacy undergarment, and a foot. Well, look at this fancy phone with the numbers right on the receiver.
Eric, is that you?
I'm not sure.
Hanlon acts shocked that he's still in bed and wants to know if he's alone. Notice he checks the floor real quick in case they slipped off from the slick sheets. I think these silky black sheets are gross looking. So after he looks around to see if he's alone, he concludes that he is alone, which makes me wonder who owned those shoes and that lacy top thing, and are they running around barefoot?
That chick that you put me onto, she brought her little sister along.
Paul tells him to get out of bed, dunk his head in some coffee, and get to the pool because they are headed to Montreal at 6:30 tonight.
If we move fast enough, I can still pin down that hockey franchise for you. I've been on the horn to the Canadians.
What am I gonna do with another sports franchise?
Paul again tells him to get up and go down to the pool for a workout.
I don't want you daydreaming when we get to Canada. I need your signature, kid.
Hold it, Hanlon. Next time you call me kid, you've had it.
Paul says he's not doing this for himself, he's doing it for this kid's dad. Hanlon reminds Eric that all his dad ever wanted was the biggest sports empire franchise in the world.
Yeah, Paul. I don't need to hear that again. 6:30. I'll be ready.
I'll talk to you later.
Paul looks at the clock again and picks up a red phone.
Yeah.
I want Rizzo.
This is me. This is Rizzo, Paul.
Here's a familiar face as well as voice. Coach Rizzo is played by James Gregory, born 1911 in New York. He was Uncle David in Short Fuse.
Look, you know the game's just about ready to start.
I've got eyes. Rizzo, I want you up here at halftime.
Paul says he doesn't like Rizzo's game plan and he wants to make some changes. Rizzo's all frustrated, saying, "I thought we settled this all last night."
Last night's last night. Today, we gotta win. This one.
And Paul takes off his shirt, so we know without a doubt he's changing his clothes.
You can't make up your mind on third down, you call me.
Yes, sir. There. What's this for? Shove it up the field telephone.
That guy should be familiar to us as well, shouldn't he? This is Marv Goh, born 1932 in California. He was the one just playing with Teddy in the previous Robert Culp episode, Death Lends a Hand.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to trouble you at home, Leo.
No sweat, just playing with Teddy.
It is very fitting for him to show up in this particular episode because of his history with the University of Southern California as both a football player and a football coach. Well, the football game is about to begin, and look how excited we are. A pretty big majority of Americans love American football, and oftentimes get carried away. We get a good look at Paul's clock again, and it is right at 2 p.m. Looks like Paul is now dressed up in a white uniform and putting on a little vendor hat. This is one of my favorite parts when he practices smiling. What a pleasant looking man he can be. And then when he puts on his sunglasses, he is suddenly very cool in his composure. In the closet is his little vendor box to complete his disguise. As he walks down this very slim hallway, we see many large cables coming from the room. Pretty sure they are some more film crew cables. It's hard to hide those things sometimes. As the United States national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, is playing, we see stock footage of the crowd standing and singing. It is a tradition in America to stand and sing our national anthem before any sports event. Once the U.S. and its allies were victorious in World War I, patriotism soared, and one of the best ways to promote U.S. allegiance and loyalty was in a crowd. Therefore, sports events were a perfect opportunity to sing the Star-Spangled Banner. It was the 1918 World Series when the Chicago Cubs faced the Boston Red Sox where it all actually began. The national anthem played during the 7th inning stretch, and a sports tradition was born. We stand for the anthem as a sign of respect. It is honorable to stand your tallest and give attention to the flag as a symbol of American unity and freedom which our country represents. Paul Hanlon strategically walks down the stairs during the anthem now that the majority of people should be distracted as they sing and their attention is focused elsewhere. This fella here never even saw him as he sings, his heart swelling with pride. Paul arrives at a ding-a-ling ice cream truck, which is a 1960s Chevrolet C-Series Apache. He looks around menacingly and does the staple Robert Culp sleeve and shoulder adjustment maneuver. He gets in the truck and takes off. Although I wonder where the ding-a-ling guys are. Paul must be absolutely certain they are not going to be stopping by their truck during this time. And the crowd releases hundreds of balloons as a celebration of the game beginning. But I don't know if this is still something that is practiced today or not. We get to go for a ride with Paul as he flies down the road and takes out a little pocket radio broadcasting the game. Some football footage and then a couple lanes away driving footage, which I think is really cool. And this guy passing by in his 1960s Chevrolet Impala is either waving at us or just enjoying the wind. Oh, and then a 1970s Chevrolet El Camino passes in front of us. More football footage emphasizing that the Rockets are not doing too hot against the Pilgrims. Here comes the ding-a-ling truck, stopping at a phone booth. It seems like a slightly random spot, but maybe it isn't. Did you notice this rainbow? What a perfect moment. We zoom way in to have a look at Hanlon making a call, but darn it, the line is busy. I really like that the camera is looking through the truck to see Hanlon, rather than just being right up next to him.
I placed the order for that juice 20 minutes ago. Stick in a couple of little half pints, will you, for travel size, right?
Now we know who Hanlon was calling and why the line was busy. Eric is trying to get over his hangover with some more liquor. Eric Wagner is played by Dean Stockwell, born 1936 in California. He's been acting in films since he was 9 years old. Some of the films he's known for are The Mighty McGurk, Down to the Sea and Ships, The Boy with Green Hair, The Happy Years, The Careless Years, Long Day's Journey into Night, Sons and Lovers, Compulsion, Married to the Mob, which is the film I first saw him in. He was also in every episode of Quantum Leap as Al. We will see him in one more future Columbo episode. He's wearing the bulky necklace that we saw on his bedside table earlier. Hanlon tries calling Eric again, and Eric has teleported from the hot tub to the slide along with his phone.
Yeah, Eric, it's Paul again.
What's the matter? You afraid I'd fall back asleep?
Hey, kid, I'm sorry. I was a little hard on you.
Hanlon called to see if Eric wanted him to pick him up when it was time to go to the airport. Eric says sure and mentions he's out by the pool now.
Are you in it yet?
I told you I'd be ready, didn't I? Now get off my back, Hanlon.
Paul seems pleased and heads back to the truck.
Mister, stop! I want an ice cream! Mister, stop!
I bet that brought a lot of satisfaction to Hanlon, driving off like that, leaving that girl in the dust. But now there is kind of a witness. Eric plops into the pool with his cigarette and shades. Wasn't thinking. Here comes Hanlon with his ding-a-ling truck. This house is located on Errol Way in Los Angeles, California. Here is the route Hanlon is taking up the driveway. I'm sure there's been loads of remodeling to this property, but the pool is in the back of the house. It even looks like there's a pool on the second story. Paul gets out and opens the freezer, grabbing a huge chunk of ice. The camera cuts to some underwater footage of Eric swimming laps. This is just amazing. The episode has barely begun and there's already been so much incredible camera work. And here comes Paul up the stairs looking quite threatening with a remarkable view behind him. You know, you'd think he should look kinda silly with this dingling outfit, but Robert Culp can probably look sinister in anything you dress him in. The camera continually cuts between Hanlon walking and the underwater swimming footage, leading us up to something very intense, I'm sure. Speaking of intense, the music for this episode was composed by Dick de Benedictis. We've already met him back in Etude in Black. He composed such a great soundtrack for this episode. Anyway, Paul comes right up to the pool and Eric notices him and is really confused by his presence.
How'd you get here?
Eric starts climbing out of the pool and Paul raises his arm, the sun shining through this brick of ice, and we watch it slam down and hear a thump, but once again, we do not actually see the impact. Now some more amazingness with this crisp, slow motion shot that I bet was very expensive for how much film we needed to capture Eric falling so gracefully into the water. And you know, there was slow motion involved last time Robert Culp's character killed somebody.
Please excuse me. Let me go!
Then Paul tosses the giant piece of ice into the pool, confirming that ice is the perfect murder weapon because it disappears. Eric is floating face down and drowning to death now. Paul backs away, watching him and looking about very seriously, and he noticed he left wet footprints behind. He takes off his shoes and goes for the water hose, spraying away his shoe footprint evidence. I always thought his feet should have been sweaty from not only the California heat, but also just from the dramatic event of murder that just took place. So, to me, it seems like he would be leaving actual footprints behind. But I guess Paul Hanlon is just too cool to have sweaty feet. So he grabs his shoes, checks his watch, and gets out of here. More driving, crossed with football scenes. And speaking of Paul being too cool to sweat, after he murders someone that he's known for years, he eats ice cream. And now it's halftime, which means it's time to go get an all-American hot dog. It also means Coach Rizzo's coming up to see Paul at his request earlier during his angry phone call.
Rizzo, I want you up here at halftime.
Looks like it's a little after 3 as Rizzo comes in.
All right, Mr. Hanlon.
Oh man, did he not make it back in time? Well, that's not good. How's he gonna talk himself out of this one? Well, as Rizzo is about to leave, Paul wildly opens the door, Well, I guess he was just changing his outfit.
I'm still not going to take a chance. Put Ludden in there with his bad knees.
Okay, Rizzo, let's skip the whole thing. I got bigger fish to fry.
And Rizzo leaves as Paul pretends to look through his binoculars. And then he lowers them and does his best evil villain glare and grin. Look out for Paul, I tell ya. Now we get a good look at Colombo's dusty radio and his dashboard loaded with papers, and he is absorbed in the football game. And look at his door, wide open. I don't think it's supposed to be open that far. A police officer lets Colombo know that the coroner is waiting for him by the pool, but Colombo just has to finish listening to the game.
Sir, the deputy coroner is all ready to leave. He needs you okay to remove the body.
Sunday afternoon.
Sounds like a bank vault. Colombo asks what happened, and the policeman explains the deceased's name is Wagner, and he was found floating in the pool at about 2:50 p.m. by the delivery boy. We know that delivery boy is the one Eric was calling earlier by the pool to get some more liquor. Paul was lucky that the delivery boy didn't show up sooner.
Lieutenant, I've got some guests waiting for me at home.
Oh, sorry, Doc. I got here as fast as I could.
Colombo wasn't in any kind of a hurry, as we saw.
Where were you? The golf course?
My wife went bowling, and I was sort of testing out this new hammock, listening to the game. Then I ran into this Sunday.
Yeah. You want to take a look?
This coroner is actually a returning character from the last Robert Culp episode, Death Lends a Hand.
Laceration on the cheek and major contusion at the base of the skull.
How do you read that?
It's hard to say.
His name is Don Kiefer, but this is the last time we'll see of him. As the coroner tries to show him the injury on Eric's head, Colombo turns away and listens to the football game on the coroner assistant's pocket radio. I don't believe we ever experienced Colombo showing such interest in football ever again. I could easily say it's out of character for him to be like this, but then again, it is a particularly important game for Los Angeles, and maybe he just wants to know how it goes. Sometimes you at least want to know how your home team does. By the way, in case you didn't already know this, the Rockets is a made-up team for this episode. Regardless, he is being quite inconsiderate to this coroner. Anyway, the coroner's assistant is played by Greg Mace. Just like with Joe Renteria, I couldn't find anything about when or where he was born. His acting career was extremely short. He was a policeman in Outrageous Fortune and in a couple episodes of Simon and Simon.
What time do you think this thing happened, Doc?
Oh, he's been dead about an hour now. Let's put it around 2:30.
Colombo says he wants to know more about what happened here, and the coroner says it's a false alarm.
From the water that splashed in the decking, he must have been diving, and that contusion would have knocked him unconscious.
You're going to do an autopsy, aren't you?
We have to, Lieutenant. It's routine, remember?
The coroner is fed up with Colombo this afternoon, so they wheel away Eric. Colombo says he wanted to talk to anyone in the house, and the policeman says, well, there isn't anyone except the delivery boy and the neighbor.
You mean a house like this, there are no servants?
Couldn't find any.
Even though we never hear anyone say his name, this man is Sergeant Hernandez, according to the credits. He is played by Ivan Naranjo, born 1937 in Colorado. He voiced Tonto in every episode of the Tarzan Lone Ranger Zorro Adventure Hour, and was also in a few episodes of How the West Was Won and Malcolm in the Middle. Colombo tells him to go send the detective out, and then goes to check the pool, walking down the steps as if he didn't realize it led right into the water, and then acts all annoyed at the inconsiderate pool water for being here. He then has the urge to taste the water on the pool decking. Yes, I agree. The water would have definitely evaporated in the California sun. It'd probably be dry within 10 minutes. But even if the water didn't completely evaporate, the chlorine surely would have if it was pool water. But we'll ignore that and instead wonder why Colombo needed to taste it and the corpse water. Not only was Eric floating dead in the water for an hour, but we know there was a pretty wild party last night. So who knows what else went on in that pool.
Officer, is there a gardener?
Wagner had a party last night, Lieutenant. Wagner's wife is out of town someplace. Maybe Wagner let the servants go for a while and, you know what I mean?
Yep, we know what you mean. Officer Clemens is played by Cliff Cunnell, born 1932 in New York. And we've already met him as well in Blueprint for Murder as the policeman that pulled over Elliot while dead Bo was in the trunk. Clemens lets Colombo know exactly who Eric Wagner was, as well as Paul Hanlon, the general manager, and Colombo just can't believe it.
I was just listening to the game.
Colombo says he wants a whole team out here. He wants prints and pictures and the whole works.
But where are you going, sir?
To the football game.
The elevator doors open to see Colombo's pant leg rolled up, trying to dry out his shoe. We see he already has his badge ready, knowing full well someone is going to tell him he can't be here. But he's off to find Hanlon, and here Hanlon is, enjoying a drink. Colombo knocks twice and is ignored, so that's his invitation to walk right in.
It's a private box, mister.
I knocked. You are Mr. Paul Hanlon, aren't you?
Who are you? What do you want?
Lieutenant Colombo, sir, LAPD.
This is the first time Colombo introduces himself as being LAPD.
Who are you?
Lieutenant Colombo, police.
Lieutenant Colombo, local police.
I'm just another cop. My name is Colombo. I'm a lieutenant. Lieutenant Colombo. I'm from the police, sir. My name is Colombo. Lieutenant Colombo? Lieutenant Colombo. My name is Colombo, ma'am. I'm a lieutenant from the police. Colombo. Lieutenant Colombo. I'm from the police. Actually, I'm a lieutenant in the police. My name is Colombo. I'm Lieutenant Colombo. I'm a fan of yours. Police Department, ma'am, Lieutenant Colombo. I'm afraid I have some bad news for you, Mr. Hanlon. Well, Eric Wagner was found dead a little while ago in the swimming pool.
Eric?
Robert Culp actually did the same thing in Death Lends a Hand, where he was facing the opposite way of a knob he wants to turn.
Oh, no. I just talked to him.
You did?
He says, yeah, he talked to him a couple hours ago, and he said he was by the pool, which he's a terrific swimmer, so... Colombo says there was a bump on his head, and it seemed like a typical accident, but he's trying to locate his wife, and he's read that Paul is like one of the family.
Okay, Lieutenant, I'll come right over.
And don't worry, sir. I won't bother with any questions just yet.
What questions?
Colombo brings up Eric's wild party last night.
I don't think that's any concern of yours, Lieutenant, any more than it is mine. You've done your duty, that's enough, isn't it?
Whoa, he's already getting a little snippy with Colombo, and it's only been 2 minutes since Colombo walked in the door. Colombo asks if he knows about the pool service and if they come on Sundays, and Hanlon says he doesn't know of any pool services that work on Sunday, and wants to know why he's asking, and Colombo mentions the water around the pool decking. Hanlon mentions, well, it's normal for there to be water on the pool, and Colombo says, yeah, but not fresh water, there was no chlorine in it.
So, his death was an accident. There must be some simple explanation.
And Colombo says, well, that's why he said it looked like an accident, but if somebody had used a hose around there...
Like to maybe hide something?
I like how Paul swats away Colombo's theory.
I sure don't want to bother you with that now.
And Colombo leaves. Now Colombo's searching for Coach Rizzo, and he sees something he didn't really want to see.
Got a minute?
Yeah, sure. What can I do for you?
Colombo shares that Eric drowned this afternoon in his pool.
Huh? Yeah.
Oh, what a poor boy.
Hey, get that sound technician back in here to hide James Gregory's lavalier mic better. I see the box and the wire.
I was aware that you were very close to Eric's father when the man was alive, so I figured you'd want to know.
Coach Rizzo goes on to basically explain that Eric never lived up to the standards of his father, who wanted him to be a big-time quarterback, but Eric instead ended up being a would-be, half-baked swinger type. Colombo asks about the scandal columns about Eric and wondered if any of those were true.
Oh, come on, Lieutenant. The kid sowed a couple of wild oats or like anybody.
Rizzo wants to know why Colombo's asking him all these questions. Colombo explains he's from homicide, and Coach Rizzo's like, homicide? But you said he drowned in the pool. And Colombo says, oh, it's just routine. They investigate everything.
Actually, I would have asked Mr. Hanlon some of these questions, but he's a very busy man and an excitable fellow.
Rizzo says, yeah, excitable. This was one of his days.
You mean Mr. Hanlon was sort of upset today?
Rizzo talks about earlier today, right before the game started. Hanlon called him up on the field telephone and chewed him out something awful. So he went up at halftime to give him a piece of his mind, but Hanlon wasn't mad anymore.
Gee, I didn't think we did that good during the first half.
Colombo starts asking about Paul Hanlon.
Now, he's very new here with the Rockets, isn't he?
He says, no, not really. He was the PR man or public relations man first, but Eric didn't know anything about running a football club, and so he hired Hanlon to run the business for him. Rizzo continues by saying even though he's not a big fan of Paul Hanlon, there's no denying he is one of the sharpest, shrewdest general managers in the business. He got another basketball franchise and built a couple of stadiums, making Eric a couple $1 million, and Paul and Eric were the best of friends.
Really? Yeah.
Rizzo says he admits Eric wasn't the greatest, but he was an alright kid.
I don't know anybody in the whole world that would want to see him dead.
Now we are in Eric Wagner's house and find loads of flowers being brought in and set down.
Wagner residence, hold a moment, please.
So this man comes in and introduces himself as Walter Cunnell, and that he was Eric Wagner's lawyer and family friend for 40 years, I think he said. The secretary explains that she's brand new here and she doesn't know anybody's names, and she apologizes and says that she's replaced Miss Babcock.
And she was only there for a couple of days, so I...
Oh, she must have hung up on that person she had on hold a moment ago. Colombo helps bring in a huge flower arrangement.
You can go now, thank you.
Oh, no, I just helped him carry it in, ma'am. I'm from the police, Lieutenant Colombo.
Oh,
The secretary says Mr. Hanlon wouldn't be able to see him for a while, and Colombo says no problem, he doesn't mind waiting. The secretary is named Miss Johnson, and she is played by Catherine Kelly Wiggett. Unless you're going to tell me her last name was Wiget. She was in a couple episodes of The Bold Ones, Emergency, and Ironside. Colombo tells Walter Cunnell that he has had trouble locating Mrs. Wagner, and Walter says, well, he has too.
Of course, Shirley is a bit of a whirling dervish on every committee there is. Very social.
To call someone a whirling dervish means that they resemble a spinning top or is wild in their movement.
You don't mind if I ask you a personal question, do you?
No.
What'd you pay for those shoes?
I think about $60.
You don't know where I could get a pair that looks like that for around 16 or 17.
The "what'd you pay for those shoes" line was ad-libbed by Falk just out of the blue, and it stuck forever. Then Paul shows up and Walter wants to know why he had to find out about Eric's death on the news when he should have called him.
I really wasn't sure you were back from Washington, Nick.
Wagner residence? What? It's a Miss Rakoji.
I can't take any calls now, honey.
So you hear this humming noise? When I first watched this episode, I thought something was wrong with the sound. Turns out there's not.
Lieutenant, it's for you.
I left the number, excuse me. Lieutenant Colombo, well, what about the autopsy?
Colombo glances over at Paul to see if there's any reaction to the word autopsy, which there's not.
Thank you very much.
Colombo hangs up and the humming sound stops. By the way, the classical piece playing on the radio should be familiar to us. We are listening to Eine kleine Nachtmusik, composed by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. It is the exact same recording used in episode 8, Etude in Black, with Alex Benedict's special baton skills. Paul says if Colombo needs him, he'll be available in a couple hours. He still has to finish up funeral arrangements.
You don't mind if I bring another lab crew in here first thing in the morning, kind of recheck everything?
No, whatever you want. So long, Walter.
This hallway looks awfully familiar, doesn't it? It happens to be the same house used for Ken Franklin in Murder by the Book. And even this painting has remained in its place. And so has this white statue thing in the back, and so have the curtains.
Lieutenant, what is all this? Autopsy, lab crews.
Well, just part of a routine murder investigation, sir.
Walter Cunnell is played by Dean Jagger, born 1903 in Ohio. His first film was a silent film called The Woman from Hell. He won an Oscar for his role in the film 12 O'Clock High, and was in almost every episode of Mr. Novak as Albert Vane. This scene is supposed to be the landing gear of a civilian airliner coming in for a landing at the Los Angeles airport, but we are actually looking at a B-52 bomber, and this footage is from the 1963 film A Gathering of Eagles. It is very neat footage to include, though. The flying saucer-looking structure here at the LA airport is called the Theme Building, built in 1961 during a time when America was very excited about space exploration. Inside there was a restaurant named Encounter. In the 90s it was remodeled to be more of a retro-futuristic style, but it closed for what seems to be two reasons. First, the building is not within the security of the airport, so any traveler that wanted to visit would have to leave the main airport building, eat a meal, and then re-enter the airport, meaning loads of security to go through again. Oftentimes, flight layovers are not long enough for a meal plus security. The second reason is the fact that this building is surrounded by busy, cluttered, and confused airport traffic. It would have been a chore to go visit. It's a real shame. Anyway, here rolls in Colombo at the airport in his Peugeot 403. But what in the world happened to it? We know the driver's side doesn't look like this. I can't for the life of me think of anything that would cause weird black marks like this. Clearly it was purposefully done, but I don't understand why, because it just looks comically awful and unnatural. Colombo stops to have a look at this 1969 Lincoln Continental Executive Limousine. It must be Paul's limo that he took any interest. Colombo enters the airport, searching for Paul Hanlon, and walks past an insurance booth. I suppose you could buy maybe traveler's insurance here. Then Colombo sees a wall of phone booths and walks past them to see if he can spot Hanlon, and yep, he found him. So he pretends to look at the phone book while Paul abruptly ends his call so he can get mad at Colombo.
Colombo, what are you doing?
Well, sir, it just seemed like a funny place to make a funeral arrangement.
Paul just turns and leaves, annoyed. Colombo goes running after him. As Paul swiftly strides down the hall, Colombo heavily hints at wanting to know why he was on the phone.
I mean, making that telephone call right after you told the girl back at the house you didn't have time to talk to anybody.
That's why I was on the phone. I was calling off a meeting in Montreal for tomorrow.
This tiled wall also shows up during the title sequence of one of my favorite Tarantino films, Jackie Brown. Paul is gritting his teeth at this point, but is indifferent about keeping his composure.
Anyway, when you turned off at the airport, naturally I was...
All right, Lieutenant. I am meeting Mrs. Wagner's plane in just a few minutes.
Hey, isn't that Bob Harks? Why, it sure is. Born 1927 in Kansas. He was the fingerprint guy in Lady in Waiting and a dedication guest in Blueprint for Murder. It's nice to finally see his whole face. Paul moves on and is furiously silent at Colombo. Now here is another of the many, many great and interesting camera shots in the episode. Colombo is wondering what kind of marriage Eric and Shirley Wagner had in light of the kind of party he had the night before he drowned. Paul is annoyed at that question too, but he explains that Eric never grew up and Shirley was way out of his class, but she couldn't bring herself to break off the marriage.
Sounds like quite a woman.
She is.
Remember being able to walk through an airport as freely as walking through the mall? Colombo asks if Mrs. Wagner will inherit everything now that Eric is dead.
What the hell is this?
There's the theme building.
Why follow me?
Colombo says he figured he wanted to be brought up to date about everything and wondered why he never asked about the autopsy report. Paul says he didn't ask because there wasn't anything new.
Was there?
No, sir, there wasn't.
Lieutenant, you're going to find this was an accidental death. And if God forbid it's anything else.
There's that Robert Culp sleeve and shoulder adjustment that he likes to do, particularly when he's angry. Paul suggests if there was any foul play, then it was probably one of those crazy hippie girls he mingles with. He says they contacted every girl at the party and there were no leads at all. Colombo says there was a report of a ding-a-ling ice cream truck in the area at 2:30.
Turns out they don't have a route before lunch. They don't have one at 2:30. They don't even work in that area. So that's what I call a loose end, and it's something I gotta tie up.
Which brings up the topic of Paul's alibi. Colombo says he needs to find some way to substantiate that Paul was up in the box during that time, and he was hoping Coach Rizzo could have done it, but they never spoke during the first half of the game. And then he wasn't even angry when Rizzo came up to talk to him. Hanlon explains to Colombo that he called Eric from the box right before the game started, and he called him again from the box at the end of the first quarter.
Unfortunately, the telephone company's records can't prove that.
But that's not my problem, is it?
This Paul Hanlon character is so funny to me with his inability to hide his anger. His first character in Death Lends a Hand, Mr. Bremer, was described as being short-tempered, but he was pretty tame compared to Paul Hanlon. Producer Dean Hargrove was the one who suggested Robert Culp because the character Hanlon was described as hot-headed. A quote from Hargrove, "No one raised an eyebrow because Culp was the perfect example of what a Colombo villain should be. Wealthy, slick, arrogant, smart, and there weren't a lot of guys around who did what he did."
It's also my problem to find somebody who might even have a motive to kill Mr. Wagner.
And here comes the widowed Mrs. Wagner.
I'm sorry. I've just been holding it in.
I know it. Sometimes those flights can feel so long when you gotta go. Shirley Wagner is played by Susan Howard, born 1944 in Texas. She is best known for her role as Donna Krebs in the soap opera Dallas, appearing in almost 200 episodes. She is also in every episode of Petrocelli, so Paul suggests Colombo will not bother her and escorts Shirley out of the airport. Now it's nighttime over at the Wagner residence, and who is lurking about? A burglar? He sneaks up to the glass door, shining his flashlight all over the place like he's signaling ships. And look out! Here comes the guard dog. A very welcoming guard dog. I would love to know whose dog this was and why it was there. Also, if he wanted to wear Converse shoes and sneak around at night, he should have gone with the black rubber soles. So the man gets the door open and walks right into these odd metal and plastic cattails. He flips over the phone and...
You looking for something?
Hold it right there.
It's all right. He won't have a gun. Just get his wallet.
Thank you, sir.
Thank that radio over there.
Huh?
Now we get our explanation of that terrible humming sound we heard earlier. Colombo points out that the phone bug had frequency leakage because he installed them wrong.
When they used the telephone, it affected the radio. Tell me who told you to take out those bugs.
Now I have a perfect right to keep his identity a secret.
I've got a perfect right to arrest you for breaking and entering. Who hired you?
Ralph Dobbs is played by Avery, born 1924 in Pennsylvania. We've already met him as well in Dead Weight as Mr. Barnes.
I can't give you his name without his permission.
Well, I'm not worried, since I can call you an accessory to a murder. I know you're gonna help me out. You're gonna get me that information.
And Colombo takes Dobbs' wallet, buttons up his collar, and straightens his tie, letting Dobbs know they aren't going anywhere until he gives up. This is quite a rare display of authority Colombo reveals in this scene. Sometimes he just needs to take care of business and doesn't have time for the runaround. And now we have arrived at the world's quietest basketball game. Colombo shows up and looks rather small next to these guys. This scene takes place at the Notre Dame High School in Los Angeles, California. And there are a few clues as to how we know that. First, there is a banner right here that says Notre Dame High School. That's a pretty good one. Another clue is the knight armor that Colombo walks past because their nickname is the Knights. And yet another clue is the painting of a football guy with the ND Notre Dame initials. Look how excited these two are to see Colombo. That would be my face, too. Colombo wanders over to where Paul Hanlon is having an interview or something.
Where'd you get those shoes?
Miller's on Wilshire.
I first thought he said Meals on Wheels, but he says Miller's on Wilshire. I read more than once that the store was still open, but I could not find any truth to that. If you live in the Los Angeles area, is Miller's on Wilshire real, and is it open? Oh, and there's Mickey Golden again. I mentioned him at the very beginning of the episode. Then someone hollers for Hanlon that he has a phone call.
They did what? Who let him in? No, I want that watchman fired. You get in touch with my attorneys and get them to meet me over here.
Paul glances up and sees Colombo.
My office tells me somebody came in there this morning before dawn with a search warrant.
We didn't touch anything, honestly.
That photographer man in the background is played by Ben Fromer, born 1913 in Poland. He had a lot of background roles, not all of them were uncredited though. A few to mention are in Plan 9 from Outer Space, The Love Bug, Blazing Saddles, Psycho 2, and Scarface. We will see him in 3 more future Columbo episodes.
I had some trouble locating him because I didn't know that you were at a basketball game. I mean, you know, the day after Mr. Wagner's death.
Not a game. There's just some pros that live around here, like to work out together. That's Leroy Ellis.
Yep, Leroy Ellis was born in 1940 in New York. He was a first-round draft pick of the Los Angeles Lakers. He also played for the Baltimore Bullets, Portland Trail Blazers, and Philadelphia 76ers.
Pat Riley.
Pat Riley, born 1945 in New York as well, also played for the Los Angeles Lakers, but is more known for being one of the greatest NBA coaches of all time, leading both the Lakers and the Miami Heat to championships.
Happy Harrison.
Harold Happy Harrison was born 1942 in North Carolina. He played for the Cincinnati Royals, Detroit Pistons, and Los Angeles Lakers. When he retired from basketball, he did a little bit of acting, appearing in an episode of Police Story, Sanford and Sons, CPO Sharkey, and Happy Days.
Jim McMillan.
Jim McMillan was born in 1948, also in North Carolina. He played for the Los Angeles Lakers, Buffalo Braves, New York Knicks, Portland Trail Blazers, and I'm sure I'm going to get picked on for this pronunciation, but Jim McMillan also played for the Sinudine Bologna, which is a basketball team in Bologna, Italy.
That's Keith Erickson.
Keith Erickson was born 1944 in California. He played for the San Francisco Warriors, Chicago Bulls, Los Angeles Lakers, and Phoenix Suns.
Flynn Robinson.
Flynn Robinson was born 1941 in Illinois and played for the Cincinnati Royals, Chicago Bulls, Milwaukee Bucks, Los Angeles Lakers, Baltimore Bullets, and San Diego Conquistadors.
2 weeks they're all going to be working for me. Mark was the first one to sign. I had to come over here to get his signature because he's going to be gone this afternoon.
Oh, Hanlon. The National Basketball Association contacted Universal during the pre-production of this episode because they were wanting to promote the league by having some players guest star on a variety of TV shows. Hargrove found it pretty easy to fit in a basketball scene during this sports-themed episode, and so Hargrove signed 6 Los Angeles Lakers to appear, which we just listed them in detail.
I came down here to get you because I made a real wrong guess last night.
I think you made a few.
Did Hanlon just wipe the sweat from his forehead and flick it off his hand? That's funny. I've never seen anyone do that particular move after wiping their forehead. Colombo brings up the fact that the phones at Eric's house were bugged, and he confesses he thought Hanlon had something to do with it until he went and checked Hanlon's office phones.
You know what? Your phone's a bug too.
Hanlon looks completely devastated and like he's gonna be sick when he hears the news, which might be a little overacting on his part, as if he has some hugely embarrassing phone calls or something.
Apparently they've got tapes of all your conversations for the past 2 weeks. Isn't that something?
And they pull up in a police cruiser. That is a 1972 Plymouth Satellite. During the car ride, Colombo must have shared who the man was that hired Dobbs to tap the phone because Paul hastily gets out of the car, leaving the door wide open.
Well, Walter, you actually hired a private detective.
I'm sorry, Hanlon.
Since Dobbs was caught by Colombo, Walter is voluntarily disclosing everything he hired Dobbs to do. Walter says he doesn't know what's on the tapes yet, but he wants everyone to hear everything.
Mr. Hanlon, before we go...
What is it?
Bad news.
What?
Colombo starts talking about the dingling truck again and where their routes are.
Westwood, Hollywood, downtown L.A. It never occurred to me that downtown L.A. included the concession at the stadium.
Colombo emphasizes that it is even more important that they can prove Hanlon was at the stadium at the time of the murder.
Well, Lieutenant, you may be right. Let's go inside, shall we?
Now we are all huddled around the tape player listening to phone calls together.
That chick that you put me on to, she brought her little sister.
Stop it.
Walter tells Shirley that Paul was egging Eric on in order to make trouble between the two of them. Shirley says we've been listening to these tapes for over 3 hours, and this is the first time there's been any sign of anything.
What do you say that little chick that you put me on to, Paul?
Walter says he hired Dobbs to get evidence to prove to her and Eric that Hanlon had been using them. How is Hanlon going to talk himself out of this?
I think I've got it. It took me a minute to connect with the word chick.
Hanlon's awful lie that somehow convinces Shirley is that Eric said that Shirley wanted a new maid, and so Hanlon put him on to the best employment agency he could find. And Shirley's basically like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, of course.
Smooth. Seems Paul is very innocent to Shirley. So they continue the tapes and play the final phone call where Hanlon is in the phone booth with the little pocket radio playing in the background.
Do you happen to have the time that I made that call?
Dobbs says his log has it marked at 2:29.
And Eric died at 2:30.
Approximately.
Hanlon figures he ought to thank Walter because now there is proof of where he was.
And I guess that's another loose end, as you call it, tied up.
Hanlon suddenly tells Shirley that Colombo and Walter both think he killed Eric. Shirley starts getting overly dramatic and says to Walter, I don't know what I can say to you that would let you know how contemptible I think you are.
Now just get out. All of you, please leave.
Quite the little whirling dervish, isn't she? So she cuddles Paul's hand.
There's still a lot of investigating we have to do.
Just go away.
Now we are on the Santa Monica Pier, and here rolls in a 1970 Pontiac GTO, which turns out to be Dobbs's car pulling up alongside Colombo's car. This is the Oceanside East Cafe, but this area has been heavily modified, and today is the Maria Sol restaurant. If I ever get a chance to visit Los Angeles, I would like to have a meal here. Colombo is inside, sitting with a tape recorder and a bowl of chili.
Been listening to that thing 100 times.
About my license, I can't operate without it.
Didn't I give you that back?
No.
Gee, I'm sorry. Must have forgotten.
Colombo is quite apathetic towards Dobbs. Colombo says he keeps listening to the tape over and over to try and prove Hanlon wasn't in the box above the stadium.
Trying to hear a sound, something that doesn't belong there.
As Dobbs is about to sit down, Colombo gets up and walks out of the cafe, with Dobbs following him. A worker comes and cleans up the table, taking away Colombo's uneaten chili, and also this man was in Greenhouse Jungle, serving Colombo chili at the outdoor diner, but I couldn't identify him then, and I still can't identify him now, but he is the same guy. Colombo wants to know how Dobbs got the phone bugs planted.
All I can tell you, it wasn't by breaking and entering.
Listen, about the equipment, I'm sorry to hold you up on that. What's it worth?
$600.
A lot of money.
Columbo's playing hardball with Dobbs, isn't he? Dobbs gives in and tells Columbo he put a girl in Hanlon's office who ran an errand to Wagner's house, and that's how the bugs were placed.
She have a name?
Eve Babcock. She's not there anymore.
Why?
Hanlon fired her after 3 days.
Oh, a secretary.
Well, that's not her usual line of work.
And Columbo walks away now that he has someone else to question. Suddenly, we are looking at a startling wooden mask panning down to a big wooden Indian and over to a lady who looks like she's getting ready to go out. And she also does a practice smile, like Hanlon did when he was looking at himself in the mirror. The doorbell rings and she quickly kisses the Indian. Why, I don't know. She walks by a giant framed face and a glass poodle.
Hi, darling.
Miss Babcock?
My name is Eve. I've been expecting you.
You have?
And a glass horse head on the wall. And these pink wicker chairs.
Eve Babcock.
Now, will you relax, please?
Eve starts talking about going out for drinks and then to dinner and that it'll be fun, but Columbo lets her know he hadn't planned on dinner. Eve is kind of disappointed by this, but she can accommodate. Does this odd lady figure statue look familiar? Mr. Brimmer had it in his house, and death lends a hand.
I had no idea you were pressed for time. I mean, Harry should have told me.
Who is Harry?
And she has a huge snake statue for the coffee table. Columbo says he got her name from a Mr. Dobbs, and then the doorbell rings.
Ralph. Well, this is really silly.
She lets Columbo know she's busy right now, but he can be scheduled for Thursday if he likes. And then she hustles over to answer the door.
Hello, darling. This is my cousin.
My name is Lieutenant Colombo. I'm from the Los Angeles Police Department.
Miss Babcock, about those stocks, I'll call you.
This scene is so good. Well, Smith is played by John Wheeler, born in 1930 in Texas. He was in a few episodes of Green Acres, Love American Style, The Brady Bunch, The Odd Couple, and The Dukes of Hazzard. Eve is suddenly very cold and says she's calling her attorney.
Why don't you do yourself a favor? Take this appointment book and put it someplace where I can't see it. Don't call your attorney, because I'm not here to hurt you.
Eve puts her little black book under the bar, and Columbo explains he is investigating the death of Eric Wagner. He says he already knows she planted the phone bugs, but he doesn't care about that.
This is what bothers me. Why were you fired from that job after only 3 days? Because, if you don't mind my noticing, you'd be an ornament in any office.
Some of the overly and unnecessarily sensitive folk like to say that was an offensive comment to a woman by Columbo. I say, as a woman, it was a very nice compliment, and you can just move along.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Perhaps my typing was not good enough.
Columbo suggests that maybe Hanlon caught her planting the bugs and bought her off. Then Eve gets a little riled up.
You have absolutely no right to come in here and start upsetting me, asking me questions, trying to connect me with...
You're perfectly right. But I know you want to get something to eat, so I'm going to run along.
Before Columbo leaves, he has an observation to share.
You know when you got upset there? Well, the tiniest little accent came out. Do you have another name besides Babcock? Something more Hungarian, like Rogozhi? Just a thought.
I'm still trying to figure out the purpose of the alternate names with her and the Hungarianness. Was it just for fun, or was there some significance hidden in there, and I just never caught it? Anyway, Eve Babcock is played by Valerie Harper, born 1939 in New York. She won 4 Emmys for her work in The Mary Tyler Moore Show and a Golden Globe for the TV show Rhoda, which she was the title character in. She was also in the films Freebie and the Bean, Chapter 2, and Golda's Balcony, as well as 32 episodes of Valerie. Now we get some more wonderful cinematography of Columbo all alone in the huge stadium. I really like the editing here too. It's like we hear the ghost memories of the stadium or something. We see Columbo rubbing his foot, looking around, and sitting in a seat thinking, trying to figure out that major clue. Suddenly, we hear the echo of Hanlon's clock chime, but it's like it's not a fully developed notion in Columbo's mind. It's taking him a minute to connect with the word clock. Head hurt? Take a trip. Look, Montreal. That's where Hanlon made a reservation to go earlier. And this is what travel agents do until customers arrive. Look, Zurich. That's where Margaret goes to school in Ransom for a Dead Man. Look, Lucerne. That's the name of a character in a future Columbo episode. And look, 2 different cuckoo clocks. And another cuckoo clock.
Well, good afternoon, sir. And where would you like to go today?
Home.
What?
They soak my feet. They're killing me. New pair of shoes.
Colombo stopped by to ask if Paul Hanlon really did make a reservation for Montreal to leave last Sunday.
Does Mr. Hanlon usually use this office to make all his travel arrangements?
Yes, he does.
What would you check on it?
This travel agent man is named Mr. Fremont in the credits, but again, we are never given his name in the episode. He is played by Richard Stahl, born 1932 in Michigan. He was in the films Beware the Blob, 9 to 5, Overboard, as well as the TV shows The Odd Couple, Turnabout, and It's a Living. He was also a Korean War veteran. We'll be seeing him again in the future.
I'll have to consult my files.
Is that the game at the Coliseum?
Yeah.
Colombo hobbles over by the radio and starts talking nonsense to this guy who has no background on what Colombo's been working on, but he is exceptionally polite and kind to Colombo.
Boy, the number of times I heard these guys' voices over and over and over. Still can't find it.
Yeah, well, sometimes things are difficult to find, you know.
Then, one of the 3 cuckoo clocks chime. There it is. That piece of something Colombo has been searching for. We are back with Hanlon in his manager's box, and he is really into the game today. Colombo opens the door without knocking, and has a bag with him.
Colombo, what is it?
Anytime you see Colombo with a bag, you know something is about to go down.
This Ding-a-ling ice cream concession, that's the best in town. Don't ever change that.
Last time we saw Colombo enjoying some ice cream was actually way back in Prescription Murder, when he was waiting for Joan Hudson and casually dropping his wrapper on the ground. Remember, he had a bag for that scene as well.
All right, Colombo. Now, what do you want?
Colombo says he has something to show Hanlon, and it won't take long. Then, to kind of irritate Hanlon, he starts talking about how his shoes feel better.
They're giving a lot of trouble earlier.
Colombo, I'm trying to watch this game. What is that?
You know you did the same thing the first time I came in here. You turned the radio down, but not quite off.
Colombo says it's okay, he does the same thing.
You know, when I'm listening to the game and my wife interrupts, I can't help myself.
Your wife has my sympathy.
Then Colombo brings up when he mentioned Eric might have been murdered, Paul turned the radio completely off.
Well, I thought I struck a chord or something.
No, Colombo, you struck out. Now, will you please go find somebody else to pester?
Colombo again says he's not going to take long. He's just here to talk about Miss Rigorgi, or Babcock, the one who kept trying to call him at the house.
And later on, you phoned her from the airport.
What are you talking about?
Colombo says after meeting Miss Babcock, it suddenly occurred to him why Paul rushed out of the house to get to an outside phone.
You already knew that the phones in that house were bugged. You did know, didn't you? When I saw the type of lady that she was and that she liked to have her bread buttered on both sides.
I had never heard that buttered bread phrase before, and it always made me laugh. So while writing my script for this video, I looked up what it meant, and to want one's bread buttered on both sides means to profit from 2 or more separate and often contradictory things at the same time. So for this episode, that would mean how Miss Babcock was getting paid by Dobbs to put in the phone bugs, and she got paid by Hanlon to keep quiet about him knowing there are bugs. The phrase also means to desire easy prosperity, success, or wealth without having to make sacrifices or put in the effort.
And I'm sure Miss Rigorgi is going to do a lot more talking when she knows that this is really a murder. There's no question about it. Look, he did it again.
Colombo, I'm going to throw you out of here on your ear.
To be thrown out on one's ear means to be thrown out in disgrace or forced out, and alludes to being physically thrown out head first. And here comes another great line.
I wouldn't do that, sir. I mean, you'll miss the best part. You see, I'm not finished.
Colombo goes and grabs his bag and says to Hanlon that if he knew the phones were bugged, then he knew he could use the phones to set up a perfect alibi.
I knew I had to break that alibi. They're on the 10, sir.
Hanlon loves using those binoculars as an I'm busy prop.
You don't mind listening to last week's game again, do you, sir?
Why?
Happens to be exactly the same time that you made that second phone call to Eric.
Colombo explains to Paul that he listened to this recording over and over, trying to hear some sound that shouldn't be there. But then it suddenly occurred to him, maybe there's a sound that should be there, but isn't.
What kind of sound?
Shh. But are you in it yet? Will 20 more laps satisfy you? I told you I'd be ready.
And Hanlon is stunned by this. He stands up and adjusts his tie, takes a drink, and the episode ends with a spinning tape. I really like this episode. Maybe by now you have noticed that I am not a reviewer who has a checklist of what makes an episode good quality or not. The way I rate episodes is based completely on entertainment value. I have never and will never care about how well the evidence holds up in court. That is not the heart of the show. It's really all about catching the killer and the process of getting there. It emphasizes characters and their interactions with each other. But I totally get why other people love to observe and talk about evidence and the gotcha and how whether or not the evidence would actually hold up in court. And I love reading your comments sharing differing opinions and ratings to mine. I'm so thankful we don't always agree. And thank goodness each of us is a very individual person. Keeps things much more interesting.
You're a very individual person.
But of course this episode has a few problems. I'm pretty sure they all do if you're writing a by-the-book critique. But how entertained was I? Oh, well, I think I'd say about 5 Colombo cigars out of 5 entertained. This episode is a joy from beginning to end for me. The cinematography was varied and creative throughout the entire episode, as well as many funny and unforgettable scenes and lines. The 2 biggest complaints about the episode that I've heard over and over and over again are the fact that the motive is not clearly spelled out to us, which is true, but I pretty well get the idea that Paul Hanlon was intending on taking over the franchise by getting huggy-duggy with the missus. They make it clear he was very good at his job, and he likely figures the franchise ought to belong to him anyway, and Eric, his superior, is this arrogant, lazy, ungrateful kid that he has to be under and answer to. I'm sure that eats at Paul daily, so to me the motive is pretty clear. The second big complaint is the clock chiming evidence not being on the recording. I think I have to agree that it isn't the best evidence. Paul could talk himself out of it in a second. As simple as the clock wasn't working that day. Well, shoot. Maybe if they wrote in a tiny scene of Colombo inquiring about how the clock works, he could innocently find out if the clock was working on Sunday. But I don't care. I am satisfied with the ending because of Hanlon's silence and Robert Culp's acting and Colombo's silence. It was kind of a silent confession and surrender, I suppose. Hey, did you know the working title for this episode was Sudden Death Payoff? And the German title of this episode is When the Iceman Comes. I like that. When the Iceman Comes. Also, I'll throw in that Peter Falk was a big fan of the Knicks and the Lakers, so he enjoyed this inclusion of the basketball scene with the Lakers team playing in silence. Also, I'm kind of late in mentioning this since it is November 1972, but on May 6th, 1972, Peter Falk wins his first Columbo Emmy Award. Although it wasn't his first Emmy that he had ever won. His first Emmy was in 1962 for his role on the Dick Powell Show episode The Price of Tomatoes. There he is with Don Knotts and Carl Reiner. He is one of the top 10 youngest Emmy winners at the age of 34. And he will win 3 more Emmys for his role as Columbo. His 1972 acceptance speech is available on YouTube if you haven't already seen it.
Yeah, it really is. It's terrific to win. I'm trying to figure out some way to appear humble.
My final note about this episode is that it is the second episode where Colombo never lights his cigar. It's either already lit or not lit. I mentioned this at the end of my Murder by the Book review as well because I like to choose a screenshot of Colombo lighting his cigar for my episode ratings, but today was not that day.